All right, welcome back. I hope the midterm went well for everybody. Went well for me anyway, but hopefully you guys did really well, knew all the answers. I haven't graded them yet, but hopefully I'll get to that pretty soon. I expect that everybody that took it probably did okay. I was looking back through my videos and I noticed that this is pretty much a documentary of my beard more than anything, because I haven't shaved since I started the videos, so it's getting kind of long. Um, Hopefully maybe I'll shave soon. What I want to do this week is we're basically going to talk a little bit about terrain modeling. We're going to use some elements of terrain modeling to incorporate into our cars on the next project. But for this week, what I want you to do is, it's going to be kind of tedious, but it's really important just to get the steps down. So I'm going to go through the process that I'm going to use to make a terrain, and then a second terrain, and then maybe even a third terrain. But the third technique's not going to be really useful for the cars, but it's a cool technique that you need to know anyway. So the first thing I want you to do is just make a plane in your space. I've turned off the grid because I feel like that gets in the way a little bit. So I'm going to turn off my grid, and I have a plane just kind of sitting in space. What I've done, the plane is if I open up my channel box editor, I can come down to polyplane, and I can make my plane subdivisions 10 by 10, which is what I want. What that means is I have 100 faces here on my plane. 1, 2, 3, I'm not going to count them all. But I should have 100 faces on my plane to manipulate. I also, in the channel box editor, want to make my scale, and by default, it's 1 by 1 by 1. I'm going to make it 5 by 5 by 5. It just makes it a little bit bigger, which means some of the tools work a little bit better. And you can actually change all of those at once. If you just click and drag, you can highlight all 3 of them, and you can change them all at the same time to whatever you want. Again, I'm going to use 5 by 5 by 5. So a tool that a couple of you have found already, sorry about that, and we've fixed it, but it's called the Soft Select tool. And by default, you'll notice if you select one vert, you can move just that one vert. It makes really hard edges. But what we're going to discuss today is how to use the Soft Select tool to make a little bit more, I guess, softer edges, softer ridges, softer transitions between vertexes. So I want you to double click on your move tool over here as you're working on it, and we're going to activate the soft selection tool. So you see you have all of these settings here in the move tool. The only one that's open by default is the move settings, which is fine. We don't really need to mess with that. What I want you to do is come down to the bottom. You might have to scroll, you might not, depending on your screen resolution. But there's going to be a tab for soft selection. I want you to open that up and just engage soft selection. By default, I think the value is maybe 1. It might be 5, but whatever the value is for the fall off radius, I want you to set it to 1. And when it's 1, I'm going to close this so you have a little bit more visibility. When it's 1, you'll notice you can move it, and now all of a sudden it's moving the vertexes around it, but it kind of just creates a really contour shape. Now if I turn this up and I set it to 3, you'll notice it moves even more, and you get even more of a convex, concave shape, which is really what we want for this project. So what we're trying to do is develop just really kind of straightforward terrain, kind of a hilly terrain, something like that. So I'm just going to set mine to 2, and the whole concept for the first stage of this project is just to come through and manipulate just individual points. And we want to create just a terrain that has a lot of different height variance to it. And you can change your fall off radius as you're working through. There are a lot of other settings for the fall off radius, but we're not going to use anything except just the fall off radius. The volume, surface, global, and object, those are all really useful in different scenarios, but right now we want to stick with volume and just work with just our fall off radius and not worry about too much of the other stuff. So like I said, we're making a terrain and just trying to focus on getting different height variations in the terrain to where you end up with something that, you know, looks kind of like hills, maybe has a couple of really deep crevices or something. And maybe one big hill. So you end up with a piece of terrain. Now, I talked to you about the soft select and told you that some of you had found this already by accident. The way to find it by accident is to press B on your keyboard. So if you press the B key, which is what I'm doing right now, you'll see it says soft select mode is on, press B to turn it off. So if I'm selecting a vertex and I press the B key, I'm no longer in soft select. When I press it again, soft select is back on. What's really cool about soft select is you saw me coming to here to change the fall off radius. What you can do instead, if you just hold down the B key, you can actually left click with your mouse and you can change the size of your fall off radius to give you a little bit more control over what you're doing. You can make it really small, and in fact, if soft select is always on, you can turn it to 0 fall off radius, and then you're moving the verts just like you were before without soft select on. So that's up to you. That's kind of a personal choice as to whether or not you like the coloration. But for this project, like I said, just make a terrain. So that's pretty much the first stage of this project. I would want you to go through and just kind of create your own terrain. But I want to show you a couple of other things really quickly. We've talked about coming through and selecting individual verts, or you can select multiple verts if you hold down the shift key. And you can also deselect verts by holding the shift key. If you press the control key, so let's say I have all of these verts selected, and which you can do by the marquee selection. The control key on your keyboard, you'll notice when you hit it, it just shows up a minus sign out to the right of your cursor. So if you hold down control, all you can do with control is deselect vertexes. So you notice if I highlight this vertex and click on it while I have my control button held down, I can only deselect the vertexes. With the shift key, I can select it and then deselect it if it's already highlighted. But sometimes you just want to deselect, so you can hold down control and deselect everything. Or you can hold down shift and select everything. Either way is fine, but it's just good to know how to deselect, because sometimes you select things you don't want, and it's easier if you have something you've selected that you don't want. It's easier just to unselect it or deselect it than it is to undo and try and select it all over again. So also that same thing goes for edges. You can select the edges that you want and hold down control and deselect the edges, or drag to deselect the edges. And it also goes for faces as well. You can select the faces with shift, deselect the ones that you don't want with shift, or you can press control and just deselect faces, which is cool. In other news, the soft selection tool also works on faces and edges as well. One other thing I want to show you before I end this video is what's called the face loop and the edge loop. I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but there's an easy way to select an edge loop or a face loop. So we'll start with the edge. So I've got this edge right here, and you notice the edge loop that connects to it is all of these edges as they go along. If you just double click on any one of those edges, you'll notice that Maya automatically selects the entire loop. Some of you may have figured this out already, and I think I may have mentioned it really briefly in another video, but I did want to demonstrate it again to make sure that you know how it works. And you can come through and hold down shift and just select as many edge loops as you like. The loop tool doesn't work quite that way with the face. If you just double click on one face, what you're going to end up doing is selecting your entire object, which isn't necessarily helpful. And that same thing works. It doesn't work for the vertexes either. But if you're in face selection mode and you have one face selected, if you just hold down shift and double click a face directly beside of that face, then it'll create an edge loop in the path that those two faces are selecting. So if I click that one and then double click on this one, then it'll create a face loop going in that direction, or I can make one going in this direction. Now sometimes if you want to create a cross, that's really useful because you can just start with the first one, but you'll notice sometimes it doesn't work. So making the cross is kind of tough, but what you have to do is start with one square and then select the square beside of it, and then select the square beside of the second selection that you made, and that will make the cross. If you don't do it that way, if you try and use the first box, then it's just going to select everything, which generally isn't what you want. Also, sometimes you'll run into problems when you're trying to select multiple rows, where right now it's working, but sometimes you'll get something. It'll either select the whole thing, or if you're trying to select maybe this row here, like I said, sometimes it selects the whole thing. If you're trying to select these two rows, sometimes it'll come through and actually select a cross row instead. It's a little bit finicky when you're working with the loops with the faces, the whole point of that part of the presentation. But you can also do the same thing with vertices, where you come through and you can select rows of verts as you want, and that's the same just by selecting one vert and then double clicking the one beside of it. What's also useful is sometimes you don't want this entire row, so you can come in, select one vert, find another vert on that row, and just double click it, and it will only select the vertexes between those two. It'll do the same thing for the edge loops. It'll only select the edge loops between those two. And it even does sometimes the same thing with faces. Like I said, it's a little finicky with the faces, but it does usually work. And you can just select the faces between those two. Alright, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in this video. For the first part of the assignment, like I said, you're just going to make a basic terrain. The next video will cover the second part of the assignment. Thanks, guys.